Okay, so this is the third segment of the Q&A, and a lot of questions were raised about mindfulness and what mindfulness is and how we can use that to support ourselves and our mental health and the mental health of our children. So I suppose this area is really in line with where my expertise lies. So I can talk about this for hours, but I'll just keep it short, and I'm happy to talk to people if they would have any more questions about it. But what is mindfulness? And I find that there's often a lot of confusion about what mindfulness is and what it is not. So one thing that it is not, it's got nothing to do with controlling your thoughts or controlling your mind. It's got nothing to do with emptying your mind or thinking positively or anything like that. Mindfulness is just an awareness of what you're experiencing in the present moment. So whether it's something good or something bad, it doesn't really matter. Mindfulness is just being aware of what you're experiencing. That can feel really great if you are feeling good, but if you're not feeling all that great, it can be quite challenging, but it can still be a very useful technique and strategy to support you with your mental health. So how can mindfulness benefit parents, families, and the young person with CHD? So, I mean, there's a number of ways, and I suppose there's a number of different levels of complexity in terms of how mindfulness can be beneficial. I suppose the most basic, for me, the most basic approach and the most basic benefit is there's a lot of research showing that it's really grateful for stress management. So help to relieve stress, to improve well-being, relaxation. Can also be really helpful to help you or your child get to sleep, because it can make you feel quite sleepy, and that can be a really great strategy just to help manage stress in general. For me, the next more complicated benefit or complex benefit is really building awareness of what we're experiencing internally. So knowing when we are getting perhaps recurring thoughts that might trigger a stress response or might trigger depression or might trigger anxiety, being able to be more aware of the thoughts that come up and also the feelings that come up that might be linked with those thoughts. And also it helps to increase your awareness of your responses to those thoughts and feelings. Oftentimes we can be quite snappy and react and be quite grumpy or aggressive or angry, and that can affect our interactions with our loved ones and our relationships with our children and partner. However, knowing that perhaps that reaction came from some thoughts or feelings that you experienced just prior to that can be really helpful. And mindfulness can be used as a strategy. We're kind of moving more into the acceptance and commitment therapy area here, but mindfulness can be used as a strategy. Once you identify that you're having thoughts and feelings that are perhaps distressing or not very helpful, if you're mindfully aware of that happening, it actually opens up a choice or a space for you to choose to behave or respond in a different way. So it's not necessarily going to eliminate the thoughts. It's not going to get rid of those feelings of stress or anxiety. But what it will do is give you an opportunity to perhaps respond differently to your partner or to your children. Even though you might want to yell and scream, you might choose to respond in a little bit of a different way to maintain a positive relationship in that particular interaction. How can it be beneficial for people? So again, improvements in stress and well-being. It's a great tool to help manage behavior change. So if you do want to change the way you respond to different situations or different thought processes, it can be a great tool for that. But also, some studies have been finding that it increases from a neurological perspective. It increases the blood flow to the frontal part of the brain, which is linked with functions like greater attention, empathy for others, perspective taking, greater planning, greater organisation, greater capacity to manage your behaviours and your emotions. So mindfulness helps to, research seems to be showing that mindfulness helps to activate those frontal parts of the brain, which over time some studies have shown that have been linked to changes to brain networks and the way that the brain functions. So lots of positives coming out of the mindfulness research area. Should mindfulness be a tool introduced to families at the beginning of the journey? I think it's a very good tool at whatever stage. If you're really heightened and distressed in the acute stages, it can be really difficult to be mindful and can be quite frustrating. That might not be as useful in those acute times. It can be quite tricky to be mindful when you're quite elevated with your emotions, but certainly throughout the journey, mindfulness is such a useful skill that has benefits across many areas of your life and many areas physically as well in your body. So there's no reason that anyone shouldn't be practicing mindfulness if they're able to and if they would like to. What are the things that you find make people reluctant to try mindfulness? This is a great question, and this is something I get a lot of resistance from a lot of people, as do a lot of other psychologists and mindfulness practitioners, that as soon as you say mindfulness, a lot of people say, I can't do it, I've tried, it's just not for me. And that might be the case. Again, everyone's different, but the tricky thing about starting mindfulness when you haven't done it before or you're new to it is noticing that when you do start to slow down and start to be more aware of what you're experiencing, that you start to notice that how fast your mind is racing and that it's going all the time, and the emotions that come up as a result. And this constant flow of experience can be a little overwhelming, and you can feel like you're actually doing it wrong because your mind isn't quiet. Whereas in fact, the whole purpose of mindfulness is just to build up that awareness. So just noticing that your mind is busy is perfect. Bring your awareness back to something. So mindfulness is all about focusing on something in the present moment. So whether it is focusing on your breathing, focusing on your thoughts, focusing on different parts of your body, focusing on a particular visualization, it's just focusing on something. And when you do focus on something, you're going to get distracted. Your mind is going to start thinking about the meeting that you had at work today, what you have to cook for dinner tonight, do you have enough in the pantry to cook dinner, what are we doing this weekend? Your mind's just going to go to all these different places, and that's perfectly fine and perfectly normal. Notice when your mind goes somewhere else, and then bring your awareness back to the present moment. That process of noticing when your mind's wandered and bringing it back is the skill of mindfulness. And building up that skill takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes energy. But the more that you become aware that being distracted doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, noticing that you're getting distracted actually means that you're doing it right. So, and that can be frustrating in the initial stages. So that's one reason why people can be reluctant to try mindfulness. This is more about the Take a Breath program. So what did the program reveal? So We're actually about to submit the paper into an international journal, which is exciting for our team. And what we did find broadly is that the program did help with reducing post-traumatic stress symptoms, improving well-being and mental health, improving mindfulness, living with in a more mindful way, and also living in a way that's more aligned with what you value and what's important in your life. So for us, that was a really important outcome for the study. Will the Take a Breath program be a permanent fixture at RCH, at the Children's Hospital and potentially other hospitals? So this is a tricky question too, and again, this comes down to funding, and it comes down to the different hospitals and what they're able to, what they can afford, and what they're able to provide, the services they're able to provide. So we're just starting now to think about strategies and ways and approaches to get Take a Breath out there, so families that need the program can actually access it. The great thing about Take a Breath is it's done online via video conferencing, so it doesn't matter where you live, you'll be able to access the program. So we're still working out how we can make it accessible to families. Another family said, I've heard parents describe struggling with the sense of grieving and fear of their child's death, even when the child is quite well. How can we make sense of these thoughts and feelings that creep in without letting them consume us? So this is really in the area of PTSD, where that's an area of post-traumatic stress, symptom of post-traumatic stress, where you get these recurring thoughts and feelings, and it's a completely normal reaction. And mindfulness can certainly be helpful with this, to just notice when that's happening, to notice when these thoughts are coming up, to notice the impact that they're having on how you're feeling. Mindfulness won't get rid of the thoughts, and mindfulness won't change the emotions that you feel as a result. But what mindfulness can help with is when you are aware that this is happening and the reaction that it's causing in you, you can actually make a choice. And you can choose to respond in the way that you always have, or you perhaps can choose to respond in a way that's more consistent with the parent or the partner that you would prefer to be. Even though you don't feel like doing it and that you're terrified and overwhelmed, thinking about your behavioural responses and how you interact with others can have a big impact on and really make a big change on how much or how little these thoughts and these experiences impact you on a day-to-day basis. What can people do to prepare for stressful situations like surgery? Well, again, similar to the resilience piece that I spoke about I think it was in the first segment, is thinking about getting as much social support as you can, improving your mental health and your mental state as much as possible, using mindfulness and practicing mindfulness before you get into that distressed state can really be very helpful, because that can help down the track when you do become more distressed and when you actually need to use those skills. So that's the end of the mindfulness questions. There's just one more segment, which is just general questions, and I will answer those in the next segment.